Banks were literally being closed every weekend. You would see the government black Suburbans pull up. They would park at 5 o'clock on Friday. They would come in, they'd let you know your bank's being shut down. They would cover signs and they would come in for the whole weekend. Nobody could leave until they kind of worked out the different things they had to do. And
Whoa.
this was happening all the time.
Can you explain that real
Yeah.
quick though? Like what was that? So the federal
Yeah.
government would come in
Yeah.
and make sure what like the books were straight.
Yeah, so basically what was happening, first of all, the residential world blew up, right? You've got people getting a mortgage with no money down. And I remember this time. I remember people buying 5 or 6 houses with no money down. I remember people going to a residential closing and getting money back. And I remember as a banker thinking, this is insane. And then when it stopped incredibly fast. And so banks were in a tough position where they had to foreclose on homes. This spread to the commercial world. It was Florida. What we used to lend on primarily was real estate. Everybody thought, real estate in Florida was never going to go down in value. Well, it did. At that time, they said all banks have got too much real estate. You need to, get rid of those loans. Well, there was nowhere to go. If you were at too high of an area, they saw values dropping. So basically, what they did say, okay, you need to go get appraisals on all your commercial real estate, and it was called market to market. They would take him and say, okay, it was worth $1 million, but now it's worth 700. Bank, you need to reserve that difference. Even though there was no payment problems, nothing. Because there was this drop in value, they were making banks reserve this huge amount. So you had the combination of you weren't making loans and you were reserving to the point where you got out of whack. Regulators would shut you down.
So that's what those SUVs were doing there. They were checking on your portfolios, checking your loan
They weren't
balances.
even checking. They had already done that because the regulators were in the banks all the time. They had already determined you're
So
done.
they were there to basically shut you down.
They were shutting you down because they already had a buyer set up. And they would show up, cover your signs, bring people in, and the new bank would be basically installed to run that bank. Is that not crazy?